She looked like any other business passenger in seat 12A, maybe an accountant, perhaps a consultant. But when the pilot collapsed at 37,000 feet and the flight attendant desperately called for licensed pilots, the woman in the navy blazer stood up. Her response would reveal a legendary military call sign. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Elena Martinez settled into seat 12A, adjusting her simple navy blazer and placing her worn leather briefcase under the seat in front of her. To the flight attendants bustling through their pre-flight checks, she looked like any other business traveler heading from Chicago to Los Angeles. Probably an accountant, maybe a consultant, certainly nothing that would distinguish her from the other 178 passengers aboard Flight 892. The flight attendant, Mark, offered her a pillow and blanket with the same practiced smile he'd given everyone else. Elena accepted politely, then pulled out what appeared to be a standard business magazine. The man in 12B, a chatty sales representative named Robert, tried to strike up conversation about quarterly earnings and market trends, assuming she worked in some mundane corporate role. Long flight ahead, huh? I'm in pharmaceuticals. What line of work are you in? He asked, settling into his seat with the familiarity of someone who flew this route regularly. I work with systems analysis, Elena replied diplomatically, which wasn't entirely untrue. She just didn't mention that those systems included the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, or that her analysis often took place at 40,000 feet while flying combat air patrol missions over hostile territory. Robert nodded knowingly. Probably IT consulting or something technical like that. Must be interesting work. I bet you travel a lot for client meetings. Elena smiled noncommittally and returned to her magazine, which was actually a technical publication about aeronautical engineering that she used to stay current with advances in aviation technology. The pages were filled with articles about new engine designs, avionics upgrades, and flight control systems, knowledge that remained relevant even though she had officially left military service. What the passengers around her didn't know was that Commander Elena Phoenix Martinez had just completed her final active duty assignment 3 weeks earlier. Her legendary call sign was known throughout naval aviation circles, earned during her third combat deployment over Syria when she had single-handedly protected a damaged Marine helicopter during an emergency evacuation, downing 2 enemy aircraft in the process while coordinating rescue operations for wounded ground troops under intense enemy fire. The transition to civilian life had been harder than expected. After graduating from the Naval Academy at 22 and spending her entire adult life in military service, Elena was struggling to find her place in the corporate world. The job interview in Los Angeles was for a position with Lockheed Martin's Aeronautics Division. Good work that would utilize her technical knowledge, but it felt like a pale shadow of the responsibility and immediate purpose she'd known as a naval aviator. She missed the precision of carrier operations, where landing a $70 million aircraft on a moving deck at night required split-second timing and absolute trust in her training. She missed the split-second decision-making of combat missions, where her choices could mean the difference between protecting innocent civilians and allowing terrorist operations to continue. Most of all, she missed the knowledge that her skills directly protected American service members and allies around the world. Elena's service record read like a catalog of naval aviation excellence. After flight school, she had been selected for the elite F/A-18 Super Hornet program, where only the top 5% of naval aviators were chosen. Her first deployment aboard the USS Carl Vinson had taken her to the Persian Gulf, where she flew combat air patrols protecting coalition forces during operations against ISIS strongholds. It was during her second deployment that she first demonstrated the cool decision-making under pressure that would define her career. While providing close air support for Special Operations Forces conducting a raid on a terrorist weapons cache, her aircraft's navigation system had been damaged by small arms fire. Flying at night over unfamiliar terrain with limited instruments, Elena had successfully completed the mission and returned safely to the carrier, earning her first commendation for exceptional airmanship. But it was the incident over Syria during her third deployment that had made her legendary throughout the naval aviation community. A Marine reconnaissance team had been ambushed during an intelligence-gathering mission, and their extraction helicopter had taken multiple hits from enemy anti-aircraft fire. With the helicopter's engines failing and 2 enemy fighters converging on the scene, Elena had made a decision that would be studied in military academies for years to come. Flying alone after her wingman had been diverted to another emergency, Elena engaged both enemy aircraft simultaneously while coordinating with the damaged helicopter and calling in additional support. Her tactical brilliance and flying skill resulted in both enemy fighters being destroyed, the Marine team successfully extracted, and the helicopter crew saved despite their aircraft being too damaged to fly. The mission had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross and the respect of every pilot who heard the story. But for Elena, The medal was secondary to the knowledge that 12 Marines and 4 aircrew had gone home to their families because she had been willing to risk everything to protect them. Captain David Thompson was enjoying what had started as a routine cross-country flight from Chicago O'Hare to Los Angeles International. The Boeing 777-300ER was performing perfectly, with all systems operating within normal parameters. Weather conditions were ideal across the entire route, with clear skies and light winds that would make for a smooth 4-hour flight. His co-pilot, First Officer Amy Chin, was handling the communications and monitoring duties with her usual competence. Amy was a former Air Force pilot herself, having flown C-130 transport aircraft before transitioning to civilian aviation 5 years earlier. With 4,200 total flight hours and excellent ratings on the 777, she was being considered for promotion to captain within the next year. "Beautiful day for flying," Amy remarked as they leveled off at their cruising altitude of 37,000 feet over the Kansas plains. The autopilot was engaged, and all flight management systems were functioning normally. "Should be smooth sailing all the way to LAX. I checked the weather again, no significant turbulence expected, and we're tracking to arrive 15 minutes early." "Roger that," David replied, settling back in his captain's seat to monitor the automated systems that would guide them safely across the continent. At 52 years old, with 23 years of commercial aviation experience including 12 as a captain, David had accumulated over 18,000 flight hours and flown this particular route hundreds of times. "I've got to hand it to these new aircraft. The automation systems are so advanced they practically fly themselves these days." David was thinking about his daughter Sarah's soccer championship game that evening. If they maintained their current schedule, he would be able to drive straight from LAX to her school in time for the opening kickoff. Sarah was the team's leading scorer, and David had never missed one of her important games. "Dave, do you mind if I grab some coffee?" Amy asked, preparing to contact the flight attendants. "Go ahead. I'll keep an eye on everything up here." Those would be among the last words Captain Thompson would speak coherently for the next several hours. The medical emergency happened with terrifying suddenness. David was reaching across the center console for his coffee cup when his left arm suddenly went completely numb. The cup slipped from his fingers, spilling hot liquid across the instrument panel as his vision began to blur and distort. "Dave, you okay?" Amy asked, immediately noticing his strange behavior and the coffee spreading across their controls. Captain Thompson tried to respond, but found that words wouldn't form properly. His tongue felt thick and unresponsive, and the cockpit instruments seemed to be swimming in and out of focus like he was looking at them through water. A crushing sensation began building in his chest, and he felt as though the air was becoming too thick to breathe. He reached toward Amy with his right hand, trying to signal that something was seriously wrong, but his coordination was failing rapidly. The reaching motion became an uncontrolled spasm, and then his entire body went limp. "Oh my God, Dave!" Amy shouted, reaching over to check on her captain. David's eyes were open but completely unfocused, staring straight ahead without any recognition of her voice or presence. She quickly checked his pulse. It was there, but weak and irregularly rapid. His breathing was shallow and labored. Amy realized immediately that Captain Thompson had suffered either a massive stroke or heart attack. In either case, he was completely incapacitated and unable to assist with flying the aircraft. She was now alone in the cockpit of a Boeing 777 with 179 souls depending on her ability to safely complete the flight. Amy's training took over immediately. She activated the autopilot disconnect warning to ensure the aircraft remained under positive control, then switched to the emergency frequency. "Mayday, Mayday, this is United 892 Heavy," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "We have a medical emergency in the cockpit. Captain is unconscious and unresponsive. Requesting immediate priority handling for emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport." "United 892, this is Chicago Center, we copy your Mayday call," came the immediate response. "Squawk emergency transponder code 7700 and stand by for vectors to the nearest suitable airport. Please state the nature of the medical emergency and your current flight status." "Chicago Center, United 892. We have pilot incapacitation. I believe the captain has suffered a stroke or heart attack. I am a qualified first officer on this aircraft type, but I will need assistance coordinating single-pilot emergency procedures. We have 179 souls on board, approximately 4 hours of fuel remaining, and all aircraft systems are currently functioning normally." Amy began running through the emergency checklist while simultaneously maintaining aircraft control and coordinating with air traffic control. She had trained for this scenario in the simulator, but actually facing the situation with a plane full of passengers was vastly different from practicing with instructors. In the passenger cabin, those travelers with aviation experience began to notice that something was wrong. The subtle changes in engine sound, the slight variations in altitude and heading, and the general feel of the aircraft indicated that someone was flying manually rather than relying on the smooth automation of normal flight operations. Elena felt these changes immediately. After thousands of hours in military aircraft, many of them in combat situations where detecting subtle changes in aircraft behavior could mean the difference between life and death, she could identify even minor variations in how the plane was being operated. She looked toward the forward galley and noticed the flight attendants huddled together in urgent conversation. Mark appeared to be on the internal communication system, his face showing obvious concern as he spoke quietly into the handset. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Chin speaking." Amy's voice came over the passenger address system. Elena immediately noticed the stress that was poorly disguised beneath her professional tone. "We are currently experiencing a medical situation in the cockpit and will be making an unscheduled landing at Kansas City International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened and follow all instructions from our cabin crew. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 30 minutes. The passenger cabin erupted in concerned murmurs and anxious conversations. Robert, the pharmaceutical sales representative, grabbed Elena's arm. "Medical situation in the cockpit? What exactly does that mean? Are we in danger?" Elena knew exactly what it meant and her blood ran cold. She had trained extensively in single-pilot operations during her military career, but civilian airliners were specifically designed to be operated by two pilots working together. If Captain Thompson was incapacitated, First Officer Chin was facing one of the most challenging and dangerous situations in commercial aviation. An elderly woman across the aisle began crying softly, while her husband tried to comfort her with reassuring words that didn't mask his own obvious fear. A businessman near the front was frantically trying to use his cell phone, despite the flight attendant's repeated announcements that electronic devices needed to remain turned off during the emergency. The tension in the cabin was becoming palpable as passengers began to realize that their situation was far more serious than a simple medical issue with a passenger. "Attention all passengers," Mark announced over the public address system, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "At this time, we are looking for any licensed pilots who may be aboard who might be able to provide assistance in the cockpit. If you are a qualified pilot with any level of experience, please press your call button immediately so that our crew can speak with you." Elena reached up and pressed her call button without a moment's hesitation. 3 other call buttons illuminated throughout the cabin. Mark quickly began moving through the aircraft, speaking briefly with each potential volunteer to assess their qualifications and experience level. The first was a private pilot from suburban Chicago who flew a single-engine Cessna on weekends. While enthusiastic about helping, he had no experience with commercial aircraft or multi-engine operations, and had never flown anything larger than a 4-seat airplane. The second was a retired airline pilot who had flown for American Airlines before the company's bankruptcy and restructuring 8 years earlier. However, when Mark spoke with him, the man admitted that his medical certificate had expired 3 years ago, he hadn't flown any aircraft since his retirement, and he had never been qualified on the Boeing 777. The third was a crop duster pilot from Nebraska with significant experience in twin-engine agricultural aircraft. He had commercial pilot credentials and understood complex aircraft systems, but when Mark explained they were dealing with a Boeing 777 with advanced automated flight management systems, the man shook his head. "Son, I've never even been inside the cockpit of something this sophisticated, let alone tried to fly one. I'd probably cause more problems than I'd solve." When Mark reached Elena's seat, she was already standing and gathering the technical aviation magazines from her briefcase. "Ma'am, are you a licensed pilot?" he asked, hoping that she might have the qualifications they desperately needed. "Yes, I am," Elena replied calmly. "Commander Elena Martinez, United States Navy. I have approximately 3,200 total flight hours in military aircraft, including 800 hours as pilot in command of F divided by a -18E Super Hornets. I completed my active duty assignment 3 weeks ago, and my flight certifications are all current." Mark's eyes widened in amazement. He had been hoping to find a civilian pilot with some twin-engine experience, but Elena's qualifications exceeded anything he could have imagined. "Ma'am, do you think you can help our first officer safely land this aircraft?" "Absolutely," Elena replied without hesitation. "Let's go." As they walked toward the cockpit, Mark briefed Elena on everything he knew about the situation. "Captain Thompson appears to have suffered either a stroke or heart attack about 20 minutes ago. He's unconscious but breathing, and the flight attendants with medical training have made him as comfortable as possible. First Officer Chin has been flying solo since then, but she's never had to handle a single pilot approach and landing in a 777. Elena nodded, her military training automatically shifting her into crisis management mode. She had faced far more dangerous situations during combat operations, but this was different. She was responsible for the lives of 179 civilian passengers and crew members, not just her own survival and mission completion. When Elena entered the cockpit, she quickly assessed the situation with the trained eye of a combat veteran. First Officer Chen was maintaining level flight at 35,000 feet and communicating professionally with air traffic control, but Elena could immediately see the stress in her posture, the tension in her shoulders, and the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the controls. Captain Thompson was slumped in the right seat, breathing but completely unconscious. A flight attendant with EMT training was monitoring his vital signs and had placed an oxygen mask over his face. First Officer Chen, I'm Commander Elena Martinez, United States Navy, Elena said, introducing herself as she moved toward the jump seat behind the center console. I'm here to assist you with cockpit resource management and emergency procedures. You are not alone anymore. Amy turned to look at Elena, and relief immediately flooded her face. Thank God someone with real aviation experience is here. I mean, I'm qualified to land this aircraft, and I've done it hundreds of times before, but I've never had to do it completely alone. I'm honestly terrified of making a mistake with all these people depending on me. First, you are not completely alone anymore, Elena said calmly, taking the observer seat and immediately beginning to familiarize herself with the 777's instrument layout and control configuration. I'm here as your backup and support. Second, while I'm not specifically qualified on the 777, I understand aircraft systems, emergency procedures, and crew resource management. We're going to work together as a team to get everyone on the ground safely. Elena spent several minutes studying the Boeing 777's cockpit layout, noting similarities and differences with the military aircraft she knew intimately. While she couldn't legally act as pilot in command of a civilian airliner, she could provide crucial support, backup decision-making, and the kind of crew coordination that would normally come from the captain. Amy, let's start with a systems assessment, Elena said, using the first officer's first name to establish a collaborative rather than authoritative tone. What's our current fuel situation? We departed Chicago with about 6 hours of fuel, and we've been flying for just over an hour, so we have approximately 5 hours remaining, Amy replied, consulting her flight management system displays. Fuel is definitely not going to be a constraint for us. Excellent. What about our destination airport and emergency response? I've been coordinating with Kansas City Approach Control, and they're vectoring us for an approach to runway 19 left. Full emergency response is being positioned, crash and rescue equipment, medical personnel for Captain Thompson, and they've cleared all other air traffic from the area. Elena reviewed the approach charts for Kansas City International Airport while Amy continued to fly the aircraft and maintain communication with air traffic control. Her naval aviation experience had taught her that thorough preparation and calm execution under pressure were the fundamental keys to handling any emergency situation successfully. Amy, I notice you're still maintaining 35,000 feet. What's your plan for beginning our descent and approach preparation? Honestly, I was planning to wait until we were much closer to the airport, Amy admitted. I'm concerned about making major configuration changes without Captain Thompson here to back me up and double-check my procedures. I understand that concern completely, but remember that I'm here to back you up now, Elena said reassuringly. In military operations, we have a standard practice of beginning our preparation as early as possible to reduce the workload during the most critical phases of flight. Why don't we start a gentle descent and begin running through our approach checklist while we still have plenty of time and altitude to work with? Amy nodded and began the descent, visibly relaxing as she realized that she now had an experienced aviator helping her manage all aspects of the situation. As they worked through the emergency procedures together, Elena began sharing relevant experiences from her military career that applied to their current situation. During my second deployment to the Persian Gulf, I had to make an emergency landing on the carrier at night when my aircraft's navigation systems were damaged by enemy ground fire, Elena explained while monitoring Amy's descent and configuration changes. The key principles I learned were, trust your fundamental training, communicate clearly with everyone involved in the operation, and never rush a critical decision unless you absolutely have to. How do you manage to stay so calm? Amy asked. I mean, there are 179 people in the cabin back there whose lives depend on us not making any mistakes. The same way you've been staying calm, Elena replied. We're both professional pilots who have trained extensively for situations exactly like this one. We've both spent years learning how to handle aircraft emergencies. The difference between military and civilian flying isn't the fundamental skill level required. It's just the operating environment and mission parameters. You have all the knowledge, experience, and ability you need to land this aircraft safely. As they continued toward Kansas City, Elena drew additional lessons from her most challenging combat missions. Let me tell you about something that happened during my 4th deployment over Syria. We were providing close air support for a Marine unit that had been ambushed by enemy forces. My wingman's aircraft took a direct hit from a surface-to-air missile and was losing both electrical power and hydraulic pressure. Similar to what Captain Thompson is experiencing right now, but with his aircraft systems instead of his physical condition. Amy glanced over, interested in understanding how this experience connected to their current emergency. The natural temptation was to rush him through an immediate emergency landing at the closest available airfield, Elena continued. But that decision would have meant abandoning the Marines who were under intense enemy fire and desperately needed our air support. Instead, we took the time to properly assess all of our options and develop the best possible plan. My wingman was able to maintain control of his damaged aircraft long enough for us to complete our close air support mission and then escort him to a major air base with better emergency response capabilities. The Marines got the protection they needed to survive the ambush, and everyone involved made it home safely. What's the primary lesson from that experience? Amy asked. That having someone you trust completely backing you up changes everything about how you can respond to an emergency, Elena replied. You can make better decisions and execute more complex procedures because you're not carrying the entire mental and physical burden by yourself. Right now, I'm your wingman and we're going to get through this together. Elena's calm confidence and professional competence were having a powerful positive effect on Amy's performance. She found herself thinking more clearly, making decisions with greater precision and confidence, and executing procedures with the kind of smooth professionalism that had originally qualified her for commercial airline operations. Kansas City Tower, United 892 Heavy, we're 15 miles out for runway 19 left, requesting emergency landing clearance, Amy transmitted with newfound confidence. United 892 Heavy, you are cleared to land runway 19 left. Emergency equipment is standing by in position. Current winds are 180 degrees at 8 knots, altimeter setting 30.12 inches. You are cleared for the approach. Cleared to land runway 19 left, United 892 Heavy. Thank you for all your assistance, Amy acknowledged professionally, then turned to Elena. I have to admit, I'm still nervous about the actual touchdown. What if I make a mistake during the most critical phase with all these people depending on me? Amy, you've successfully landed Boeing 777s hundreds of times throughout your career, Elena replied with complete confidence. This landing is going to be exactly the same as every other landing you've made, except that instead of having Captain Thompson in the right seat providing backup, you have a Navy combat pilot in the jump seat. The aircraft doesn't know the difference and your fundamental flying skills certainly haven't changed. Elena assumed responsibility for monitoring all backup instruments and cross-checking Amy's configuration changes while Amy focused on flying the final approach. Her role was crucial but subtle. She wasn't actually flying the aircraft, but she was providing the kind of comprehensive crew resource management, situational awareness, and decision support that would normally come from the captain. Flaps 30, landing gear down and locked, final landing checklist complete, Amy announced as they passed through 2,000 feet on final approach. I'm showing all normal indications on the backup instruments, Elena confirmed. Your approach path looks completely stable. You're right on centerline and right on the optimal glide path. As they crossed the runway threshold, Elena could see the extensive emergency response equipment lined up along both sides of the runway, fire trucks, ambulances, rescue vehicles, and dozens of emergency personnel standing by. But she was completely confident that their services wouldn't be needed for anything other than providing medical care to Captain Thompson. The landing was absolutely textbook perfect. Amy touched down smoothly in the touchdown zone with exactly the right descent rate and perfect alignment, then executed a controlled rollout that would have earned praise from any flight instructor. Outstanding landing, Amy, Elena said with genuine admiration as they decelerated down the runway. Captain Thompson would be incredibly proud of how professionally you handled this entire emergency. As they turned off the runway and taxied toward the gate where medical personnel were waiting with an ambulance for Captain Thompson, Amy turned to Elena with tears of relief in her eyes. I honestly don't think I could have done this alone, she said. Thank you for being here and helping me through the most challenging situation of my career. You absolutely could have handled this emergency by yourself, Elena replied with conviction. But the beautiful thing is that you didn't have to handle it alone, and that's exactly what effective crew resource management is designed to accomplish. In the military we have a saying, mutual support makes everyone stronger. No one has to succeed alone, and no one has to face challenges without help. The medical team boarded the aircraft immediately after they reached the gate, quickly stabilizing Captain Thompson's condition and transporting him to the University of Kansas Medical Center for emergency treatment. Initial reports from the paramedics indicated that he had indeed suffered a stroke, but that the rapid medical response had likely prevented more serious complications. The passengers deplaned with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and curiosity. Most had sensed the seriousness of their situation, but few understood how close they had come to a much more dangerous emergency or how extraordinary their rescue had been. It wasn't until several hours after Captain Thompson had been rushed to the hospital and all passengers were safely in the terminal that the remarkable story began to emerge. Jake Morrison, a young aviation journalist who had been traveling to Los Angeles for an aerospace industry conference, recognized Elena's name when she was being interviewed by airport officials and FAA investigators. He approached her as she was preparing to catch the next available flight to complete her journey. "Excuse me, are you the Elena Martinez who flew for the Navy?" he asked. "I flew for the Navy until 3 weeks ago," she corrected. "I just completed my active duty service." "Are you the pilot with the call sign Phoenix?" Elena paused, considering her response. Her call sign wasn't classified information, but it wasn't something she typically discussed with civilians or journalists. "Why do you ask?" "I'm Jake Morrison from Aviation Week magazine. I've been covering military aviation for over 5 years, and the name Phoenix is absolutely legendary in naval aviation circles. You're the pilot who saved that Marine helicopter crew over Syria, right? The one who engaged 2 enemy fighters single-handedly while coordinating a complex rescue operation." Elena nodded reluctantly. Throughout her military career, she had always been uncomfortable with media attention, preferring to let her service record and professional performance speak for themselves rather than seeking public recognition. "The passengers on Flight 892 deserve to know who really saved their lives today," Jake said earnestly. This wasn't just any qualified pilot who happened to be aboard. This was one of the Navy's most accomplished and decorated combat aviators. The story broke that same evening on aviation news websites and social media. Navy combat pilot Phoenix saves 179 lives in civilian emergency landing. The detailed report covered Elena's distinguished military service record, her combat achievements, and how her exceptional expertise and calm leadership had been crucial in safely resolving the in-flight emergency. Aviation professionals around the world commented on the story, praising both Elena's performance and Amy's skill under pressure. Several retired military pilots shared their own stories about Elena's legendary status within the naval aviation community, describing her as one of the finest combat pilots of her generation. But the recognition that meant the most to Elena came 2 days later in the form of a personal phone call from Amy Chen. "Elena, I wanted to call and thank you again," Amy said, "but I also wanted to share some important news about Captain Thompson's condition." "How is he doing?" "Dave is going to make a complete recovery. The neurologist said that the rapid medical attention he received probably prevented permanent damage and may have saved his life. But Elena, I wanted you to know something else. The airline has offered me an immediate promotion to captain based on how I handled the emergency. They said my performance under extreme pressure, especially my ability to work effectively with you, demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and decision-making ability they want in their senior pilots." "That's absolutely wonderful news, Amy. You earned that promotion through your own skill, professionalism, and courage." "Maybe so, but I never would have had the confidence to perform at that level without your support and guidance. You showed me that being a professional pilot isn't about working in isolation. It's about building effective teams and utilizing every available resource, even when that includes someone you've never worked with before." Elena smiled, feeling something she hadn't experienced since leaving active military duty, the deep satisfaction of knowing that her skills and experience had made a genuine difference in protecting others. The aerospace company in Los Angeles had closely followed the news coverage of Flight 892, and when Elena finally arrived for her scheduled interview, she discovered that the entire conversation had changed completely. "Commander Martinez," the hiring manager said, "we were originally planning to interview you for a position in our contracts analysis department, but after reading about your actions on Flight 892 and reviewing your complete military service record, we'd like to discuss something entirely different. We're in the process of developing new training programs focused on emergency response procedures and advanced crew resource management. Would you be interested in heading up that entire division?" Elena considered the unexpected offer carefully. Instead of spending her time analyzing procurement paperwork and contract specifications, she would be developing comprehensive programs that could potentially save lives by teaching pilots throughout the industry how to handle unexpected emergencies and work effectively as teams under pressure. It wasn't the same as flying combat missions to protect ground troops, but it was definitely a way to continue serving others through her aviation expertise and hard-earned experience. "I'm very interested in that opportunity," she replied. But I would want to ensure that the training program incorporates lessons learned from both military and civilian aviation environments. The fundamental principles of crew resource management and emergency response apply equally whether you're landing on an aircraft carrier or dealing with an in-flight medical emergency on a commercial airliner. Today, 3 years after Flight 892, Elena Martinez leads one of the most respected aviation safety and training programs in the entire industry. Her comprehensive emergency response protocols have been adopted by airlines around the world, and several subsequent emergency landings have been successfully completed thanks to the crew resource management techniques and procedures she developed. The professional partnership between Elena and Amy Chen has become legendary throughout commercial aviation circles. Amy, now a senior captain and check airman responsible for training other pilots, regularly speaks alongside Elena at industry conferences and training seminars, demonstrating how effective collaboration between experienced aviators can successfully overcome even the most challenging emergencies. Captain David Thompson made a complete recovery from his stroke and returned to full flying status within 18 months. He frequently tells colleagues that having a Navy fighter pilot as backup was far better than having any co-pilot, and he credits both Elena and Amy with saving not just the lives of everyone aboard Flight 892, but his own life through their quick thinking and thoroughly professional response to his medical emergency. Robert, the pharmaceutical sales representative who had initially assumed Elena worked in mundane corporate consulting, became one of the most vocal advocates for military veteran hiring programs at his company. You truly never know, he tells colleagues at every opportunity, who might be sitting next to you on any given flight, and what incredible skills and experience they might possess. Elena keeps her Phoenix call sign patch prominently displayed in her office, not as a reminder of past military glory, but as a permanent symbol of the core principle that has guided both her military and civilian careers: the ability to rise above challenging situations and help others do the same. Somewhere over hostile territory today, current Navy pilots still tell the story of Phoenix, not just as a combat legend from previous deployments, but as living proof that the skills, values, and commitment to service developed during military careers continue to protect and serve others long after the uniform comes off and active duty ends. Commander Elena Phoenix Martinez had learned the most important lesson of all: that true heroism isn't defined by the type of aircraft you fly, the uniform you wear, or the specific mission you're assigned, but rather by your consistent willingness to step forward and help others when they need assistance most, regardless of where you happen to be or what you happen to be doing when that critical moment arrives.